Family disputes can make us feel isolated and vulnerable. Maybe you're going through a divorce or a legal dispute about your kids. Perhaps you've spent hours on Google or have even posted anonymously on Facebook to see what others have to say. But are you getting the actual information and support that you're looking for? Our podcast, Legal Lounge, aims to dispel misinformation and downright bad legal information to empower anyone with questions about their family, their children, their finances, their marriage, and the law. As a team focused exclusively on family law matters, we aim to help listeners not only with the information they need, but also with the hope that their situation has a solution. Short disclaimer, please note this podcast is for educational purposes only, and the information should not be relied upon as legal advice or for legal purposes. Welcome back to the Legal Lounge. We're excited to have you listen in on this very intriguing conversation with Jennifer. So Jennifer, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hi, thanks, Theresa. I'm glad to be here. My name's Jennifer Goode. Again, I actually am what I call a recovering attorney with Bernstein Private Wealth Management. I am technically the national director for the Institute on Trust and Estate Planning, which I know is a bit of a mouthful, but if we wanted to boil it down into a little bit of a shorter description, I am effectively a resource for the advisors that work at Bernstein and the professional partners they have and the clients that they work with to think about all things estate planning, income tax planning, charitable planning, and also a little bit on the sort of family law side of things, like prenuptial planning, postnuptial planning, and the like.
It's so nice to hear someone can actually recover after practicing law, because I'm still in the thick of it right now.
It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But I'm sure you learned just so much when you were, officially practicing law, that being a resource on the back end, especially when it comes to finances and estates and families, that's critical information to share.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of an honor to be invited into people's conversations about some really deeply personal issues and to make sure that we're helping them achieve their goals with respect to their family and their values. And so being able to assist in that process and make their lives easier, and certainly to make your lives easier as professional partner to us, with other lawyers in the room, I found really rewarding.
So is that your why? Like, tell us a little bit more of why do you do what you do?
Well, I got into estate planning. So I worked in corporate for a couple of years at a big law firm, and then saw my way over to the estate planning side of things, in large part because this is the nerd in me, but it's a beautiful blend of the hard and the soft. So I view the tax code as a bit of a logic puzzle. I think it's really exciting to get a right answer when there are so many areas of gray in the law. And to think about how you can sort of help someone get from A to B in the most sort of efficient way possible. But then it's also a combination of, again, the softer issues. So thinking about how you can help them make sure that their children are provided for, help them make sure that they craft a legacy that they're proud of, and talk to them about sort of the things that they care most about and the people that they care most about. So it's just it sort of appeals to both sides of my Gemini personality in a really nice way. And then moving into my current role at Bernstein, so I serve as a resource. I work with people to help them strategize and implement strategies. But I also get to do a lot of research. So I get to completely nerd out on issues that arise that sort of highlight the intersection of different areas of law. For example, when estate planning and family law meet, what are the areas there, and how can we better partner between the estate planning community and the family law community? What are some of the concepts and creative strategies that haven't yet been fully fleshed out? And so that ability to create a better solution, to educate myself, to fall down the rabbit hole of all the possibilities, it just really fills my cup and excites me and makes every day different.
I love that. Because touching on that desire to research and really find that issue that could be the game changer sometimes for some of our clients. I will note, especially in family law, we definitely go down those rabbit holes as well. And if our clients in the room, like their eyes glaze over and they're like, I don't know where I'm at anymore. Like, am I still on planet Earth? And I get it. And clients will say, is it really that complicated? And well, Jennifer, you and I, we live in the gray. So we're like, yeah, it can get that complicated.
Right.
And it's
It's
not
nuanced.
it is very nuanced, and it's not that we want to make it more difficult for our clients. And I think this is a key point here. It's that we want to make sure, no matter what the future brings, because no one can predict the future, we just want to make sure our clients and their families are protected, which is why we go down all these rabbit holes.
Yeah, I think we're trying to solve for, well, I would say that I think especially in family law and estate planning, you're dealing with people regarding issues that create a sense of vulnerability and anxiety, or can create a sense of anxiety and uncertainty. And so the solve for that is to help create some certainty by really exploring all the what ifs.
Yeah.
I tell clients that I take the what if train all the way down, sort of what if this happens, and what if that happens, and what if this and then that happens. And so I hear what you're saying, and that sometimes it feels like, why are we talking about this? That's not realistic. And it's like, no, what we're doing is creating this sort of like safe space for you by exploring all the potential like outcomes, and then planning for it to make sure that you're going to be okay no matter what comes your way.
And going one step further, because of all the research and the experience we bring to the table, it could be the difference of adding one more sentence to an agreement or to a estate planning document. And that could protect a client from so many future headaches. I mean, there's even been, in the news, like the destruction a comma or lack of a comma can cause in a contract. And that's why we are here to be those resources.
Yeah. And now that since I no longer practice, I don't do drafting any longer, but I get to see how other partners can play a role in that as well. Sort of from the financial perspective, now we do a lot of modeling to show how maybe the agreement that you put in place, it requires a division of assets or, certain payments. And we can then put those potential provisions into a model that shows what happens with the markets and how that money grows over time. And again, sort of flesh out and what I would say contextualize some of the provisions, some of the strategies, so that you're not only getting a sense of what the agreement says, but how it's going to feel and impact your life over time. So it's really nice to be part of a kind of a multi-person team to, again, craft that out, what this agreement actually does, what it feels like, and what it's going to look like in the future for the client, and provide that sense of certainty.
Yeah. And now switching over to some of those agreements and documents that we work on, let's start with the premarital agreement, or the prenup, what is termed in common colloquial. So how do you approach with this team defining the terms and agreements for a couple in a prenup?
I don't know that this is the way that everyone does it, necessarily that there is one right way, but I tend to really focus on making sure that even when we start to have the conversation about the prenup, that it's viewed in a way where it can be additive to the couple. And so I'd say this applies both to conversations. I'll have conversations with clients who are looking to get a prenup. I'll also have conversations with a parent who wants to introduce the idea of a prenup to their child. And so I think it's important how we talk about it, how we think about it, and how we view the end goal. So I tend to view it as an invitation to sort of dream about what married life can look like. So I will encourage clients to think about, listen, you would never go on a trip without thinking about what it is that you want to do, how you're going to get from A to B, how much money you should bring with you, and really plot that out and prepare yourself to be successful. So this is an opportunity for us to prepare you and plan for you to be successful as a married couple. And that includes everything from, where do you ultimately want to live? What does that house look like? Where do you plan to move in the future to support one person's career or the other? Do you plan to potentially have children? Is someone planning to stay at home at some point? All of these things will then impact the ultimate sort of trajectory and journey of the married couple. And then from there, once we have this idea of sort of because we can even have a conversation about values and sort of what the money messages were that they heard when they were growing up and how that'll impact their relationship, we can then sort of reverse engineer, okay, so how are we going to support this plan? How are we going to pay for these things? If we are looking for a down payment, is that going to come from equally from each party? Is it potentially going to come from separate property? And that will sort of flesh out and highlight some of the issues then that can go into the prenuptial agreement. I also try and identify that this is an opportunity to learn how you talk about money, because as a married person myself, this will not be the last time you talk about money as a couple. And building that skill set when you're excited about your future and you're sort of at the beginning of the journey is really helpful when you are married and you have to have those additional conversations and there's a little less excitement. Maybe the newness has come off a little bit of this, brand new relationship. So I think it's a tool creation process. It's a planning opportunity, and hopefully one that sort of at the end of the day actually makes them stronger and closer.
I love that. I love that. And I don't know if you knew this, Jennifer, but I'm relatively recently married. And so you did know
Congratulations.
that. Thank you. I got we did a prenup. And I love how you brought up the concept of, staging that dream. When I was getting married, yes, I was thinking about the dress, the colors, where everyone needed to stand. I had some bridesmaids that were taller than other bridesmaids, right? And I needed them in a certain order so I didn't look funky in the
all the important questions. Yeah.
Yeah, really important question. The food. It was so funny because my husband his family's from India. I'm Puerto Rican. And so, the caterer is like, how about Italian food? I'm like, none of us are from Italy. So like all these various.
Where do you see that tying in?
Exactly. Which, by the way, we did have really good food, Indian food and a taco station, just a little bit.
Nice.
But I say that because we spent so much time staging and planning for this one day. And it obviously a big day. The wedding itself is a big day. And especially with family coming in from out of town, maybe you don't see them but a few times every number of years. But I think there's something to be said that, yes, enjoy the time planning for that wedding, enjoy the moments, the dress shopping, the bonding with friends before you actually say the I do's. But what comes after? What comes after the day you say I do? And how much time does the average couple put into your exact points? Planning for the future, dreaming of life together, and truly staging what they want life to look like. Of course, again, we can't predict the future, but we can put certain tools in place. And I love how you point out that one of those critical tools and skills to build is how you have those communications about financial planning and finances in general. And that's critical at this stage.
Yeah. And, I think it also too, sometimes I think people will think of prenups as an opportunity to cut someone off, to protect themselves. But I also think about the provisions that honor a person's commitment to the marriage, what they do, making sure that someone who chooses to stay home to support the other person's career receives sort of acknowledgement for that contribution to the marriage. There are lots of contributions that are financial and non-financial that you would go through in understanding the prenup and the provisions there. But also at death. I mean, we also need to think that this does impact if they get divorced, but while they may not get divorced, at least one of them is going to pass away at some point. And if they're still married, we want to make sure that the survivor is taken care of. And that can be part of the conversation as well, is thinking about how do I, if I have one spouse who maybe has more assets because of their family, how do I make sure that my spouse, if they're the survivor, is taken care of? And so again, I think it can be an opportunity to show someone that you are starting a new life with, that you care enough to think about the what ifs if you're no longer there, and how you're going to provide for them in a very personalized manner. Because otherwise, it's not personalized.
Yeah.
What takes control is state statute, created by people hundreds of years ago that don't know you. So why wouldn't you take the time to really think about what happens to your beloved if you're not there?
Yeah, and I'll do a plug here. Because in North Carolina, the state statute I believe in my experience, is actually different from the common understanding of how property is divided. And to really stress this is the reality that we are an equitable distribution state, and a number of states in the United States are equitable distribution. And for some odd reason, I find time and time again that prospective clients think, oh, that means everything's going to be divided 50-50. And yes, there is a certain presumption by judges, but that's not the same terminology as equitable distribution. It's not equal. Like, people don't actually get equal distribution. It's equitable. So if, for example, you truly do want the marital estate to be divided 50-50 at the time of divorce, should it even happen, then a prenup can actually formalize that so that a judge doesn't have to do the equitable analysis and weigh all these other factors. Because again, in North Carolina, because we're equitable distribution, a judge could actually determine that something other than 50-50 is equitable for the family at that point.
Right. Yeah. And we utilize at Bernstein, we'll utilize, again, some of our modeling to look at exactly, maybe 50-50 sounds right, but we can actually model out and sort of show how much do you need to leave to your spouse to make sure that they can support their spending over the rest of their lifetime. So you can either decide on sort of a set percentage, or you can try and build in some of your specifics based on how old you are, how much you spend, what your assets look like, to provide this incredibly personalized solution for you as a couple. So, I think when you boil it down, it's just that the prenup is an opportunity for you to create a really highly personal solution for your marriage, kind of a wraparound in terms of thinking about what ultimately happens, how you plan to spend your assets, and how you provide for that person, if the unfortunate comes your way.
Yeah. I think that's really important, especially for our listeners, to learn more about and then have these conversations, both with your future spouse as well as with professionals in the field.
Yeah, just explore what the options are and what's right for you.
Yep.
It's an opportunity.
Yep. And an opportunity for a lot of personalization.
Yeah. And a lot of conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So switching gears here, because I think a lot of people understand, what a prenup is, especially because it's a term used in common language. Hell, I every time I find it like a rap song with the word prenup in it, I share it in my whole office, and they laugh because I'm like, what prenup? They're talking about it. But I think a less common spousal agreement, if you will, is a postnuptial agreement. Just for the listeners, the definition, if you will, of a postnuptial agreement is a spousal agreement, but after the date of marriage, that can work similar to a prenup, but a different set of rules and laws and considerations do apply. So how do you help your clients with postnups, and when do you see them?
So I tend to see them under just certain circumstances. So a postnup can apply, in essentially to any sort of marital agreement that's made after you're married. I tend to see them when they are being executed in connection with estate planning. So, for example, you could have a couple where maybe they have both brought assets into the marriage, and they ultimately want their assets that remain at the death of both spouses to pass to a different set of individuals. Like maybe they don't have shared descendants together, and they want their share of the assets to go to their kids from a prior marriage, or to nieces and nephews, or charity, or wherever it is. And so there's this kind of, yes, you could just leave your assets right to those people when you first pass away, but there can be conflict if you want to allow your spouse to live with the support of those assets during the remainder of their lifetime and only have a distribution after both of you are gone. So this is one of the ways where sometimes you can provide certainty for folks, that they know that when they have taken care of their spouse, that at the end of the day, their share of whatever is left can pass to the people that they care about, and there won't be sort of any conflict or concern. The other place where I see postnups arise is if you are attempting to take advantage of certain tax laws. So right now there's this huge exclusion from the gift and estate tax, the federal gift and estate tax. And that is, I mean, sort of watch this space given what just happened with the election, but it's scheduled under law as it exists now to go down in January 1, 2026. It's going to get divided in half. So you see a lot of folks who are trying to take advantage of this current law by moving assets into trust. And that can get a little sticky because you might have the assets that you're moving into trust could count as marital assets that would be subject to equitable division. Maybe there's some separate assets, and you just want to create some certainty around how those assets will ultimately be treated if, the unfortunate occurs and you wind up getting divorced in the future. So it is similar in that you are providing for certainty, and, answering for some of the anxiety that might go along with the estate planning process through this agreement. But it's a little different than prenups in that, at least in my experience, it tends to be more sort of issue focused and more discrete and less of this sort of all-encompassing planning for all the financial elements of the couple. It's a little bit more of like this specific asset or pool of assets, I want it to go here or there or to be treated in a certain manner in the future.
Yeah, I can echo that because when I am sitting down with a client for a prenup, it very much is planning in total for a lot of different scenarios. But for postnups, I find that it is a targeted goal, generally speaking, to possibly either plan, as you say, for, planning for incorporating property into a trust or to take advantage of different tax law changes. I'll go one step further. My favorite example is when parties felt that they were effectively on equal financial standing coming into the relationship, but over time that shifted. And so the postnup what came in to create almost like a system of accountability to try to reintroduce the concept of, hey, we're not just all going to rely on one party's income, especially if there were children involved. There is a time, especially when children are young, yes, maybe one spouse wants to be home with the child. But once they're in high school or hell, they're out of the house, maybe reintroducing the concept of let's both work or let's both contribute to the household. And so a good example of that was when I had a client come in one time and, the first line was, I want a divorce. And I responded, I was like, well, okay, well, what's your name? I know nothing about you. So let's start there. Hi, I'm
starting
Theresa.
point.
Yeah, and I was like, tell me a little bit more about your relationship. And what my gut was telling me is this client, this prospective client, she had this love still for her spouse. I could tell the way she spoke about him. And so I asked relatively in the middle of the consult, I was like, do you love him? And she's like, what kind of question is that? Why are you, she's looking at me like as a divorce attorney. And she's like, why would a divorce attorney ask me if I love my spouse? And
that seems really central to the issue.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. And I was sitting here, I'm like, because it sounded like you still like that she still had this love for him. And I was like, seriously, like, do you love him? And she's like, well, yes, I married him. And then I was like, well, why are we talking about divorce then? Like, that seems like a very extreme jump to go from you still love this person and now you want a divorce. And my prospective client, she was like, well, what do you mean? That's what you do when things aren't working out. I'm like, actually, there's a whole host of other tools that can be used. I mean, and I'm not, I'm talking like, let's sit you down with a financial advisor. Let's sit you down with a therapist, maybe a marital counselor. But in terms of the law, there's what we call postnup. And that's actually what we ended up doing in her case is we did a postnuptial agreement. And it was very interesting because I don't think her partner realized how much anger she was feeling and resentment she was feeling until she actually broached the topic of a postnup. And they did sign it. And he was like, he was like, yeah, I'll apply to jobs. I didn't realize you felt this way. Right. Yeah, I'll get off the couch more. I didn't realize you felt this way. And I was like,
fancy that. Going to an attorney's office to get a divorce suddenly spurs this conversation that and she hasn't come back. So I consider that I, in a way, help save the marriage. But yeah, saving this relationship that didn't need to go through the divorce process, but in the alternative, literally just needed a postnuptial agreement. And in our world, those are relatively straightforward. Again, we can get creative when we do have to do the research. But man, I would so much prefer individuals try the postnup agreement option instead of divorce any day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it just kind of forces conversations about things that may be sort of percolating under the surface that you otherwise would try and sort of ignore or kind of brush under the rug. And so if you are required to sort of think this out loud and sort of talk about it with your partner and then ultimately come to a resolution, there is an element of, we are talking about this, but the idea is that we ultimately come to an agreement. And so again, it's all about context, right? Like if you're opening up these issues in the context of trying to come to agreement, as opposed to opening up these issues with the understanding that you might want to get a divorce, I think it's just a very different end goal in mind, and it can shape the conversations around it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it opens up the opportunity to really think about different options. I think we often, and regardless of what problem we're confronted with, I think we as humans jump to the duality of options, that it's yes or no, marriage or divorce. And I like to introduce the idea of look for that third option. There's always a third option, maybe a fourth, maybe a fifth, but there's always at least a third option. Let's explore that, because maybe that's really the option that
it's best fit.
That's best fit, and everyone wants to live with. And these are. I mean, the idea of getting divorced is extreme, and I don't want to glaze over that. And so, why go to such an extreme option when there could be a third, possibly more options out there?
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think creativity is a solve for a lot of really painful issues, right? Like just like kind of flesh it out and then think about what's the best option for you based on your specific circumstances. Like, I don't think you can look at what you were sort of mentioning in terms of the all or nothing approach that maybe someone else took. Like, you need to actually kind of uncover what is really highly personal to you, what you care about, what's at play, and then from that sort of be creative in terms of what are your potential options from there.
Exactly. So shifting gears now, just because to focus more on what you do good all day, every day is this concept of a comprehensive estate plan. So if someone was thinking about their estate, planning for the future, they're done with the family law attorney, they've done their prenup, postnup things, what would you say is the things that people need to think about when they are thinking of their estate plan?
Sure. So when they're thinking about their estate plan, note that, I mean, estate plan covers kind of a lot of different issues. I think first and foremost, it is intended to provide for what happens when you pass away. Where do the material things that you own, and even sort of the immaterial things, including sort of social media, digital assets, things along those lines, where do they pass and who controls them after you're gone? But it also covers incapacity. And that is a thing that I think actually doesn't get enough attention. People tend to think about, say, for example, a will when you're thinking about estate planning. And the thing that we need to recognize is that a will literally only takes effect when you are no longer with us. So it does not do anything for that period of time where you may be alive, but in a place where you can't make decisions for yourself or for others. And given sort of the development in technology and treatment in the medical field, I think it's becoming more and more of a certainty that every one of us will have some period, whether it's short or long, of incapacity. So that needs to be part of the planning that we're doing from an estate planning perspective. I tend to talk about estate planning documents as, or at least the sort of initial set that I would say that you need to have in place as the foundation. I think of it almost like building a house. You have to have a strong foundation you can build on top of it over time. So that foundation is going to cover, again, both sort of what happens when you pass and what happens if you're alive but can't make decisions for yourself. So I think everyone knows kind of what a will is. Again, that talks about where assets go when you have passed away. An alternative to a will that is very popular is utilizing what's called a revocable trust. It's a trust that you can change the terms of at any time. You can put assets into it, take assets out. What it really serves as, it kind of has two roles. One is it serves as a will substitute. So you can basically put assets that would otherwise pass through a court supervised probate process and pass under your will after probate into this revocable trust. And by doing that, you then avoid the court involvement in the distribution of your assets when you pass away. So that is kind of that's kind of the at death element to the revocable trust. The other thing a revocable trust does is allow you to appoint someone to manage the assets inside that trust while you're alive, but if you're incapacitated. And that can be, it's sort of a supercharged power of attorney, and it tends to provide a little bit more of a seamless transition in terms of if you become incapacitated and you need someone to manage, say, mortgage payments or consolidating accounts or things of that nature. Now, in addition to your revocable trust, you still have what's called a pour over will, and it basically just, as the name suggests, it pours assets that don't get transferred into the trust during your lifetime into the trust when you pass away, thereby allowing the revocable trust to be sort of that central document that says who gets what.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in addition to those two major documents, we also have, again, the planning for incapacity. And I mentioned that a revocable trust is a supercharged power of attorney. What is a power of attorney? Well, there are sort of two different types of this document. One is a healthcare power of attorney. So you appoint someone to make healthcare decisions for you if you can't make them for yourself. That includes everything from switching hospitals, signing you up for treatments, approving surgeries, all those things, all the way down to, making sure, helping you decide sort of where you want to be placed if sort of the end of life is near, and whether or not you want to continue to receive life prolonging procedures. And then there's the financial power of attorney. So this is the document that says that someone can manage your assets, again, if you're alive, but you are incapacitated. And if you have, you can still have a financial power of attorney and a revocable trust, because a revocable trust only covers the assets held inside of it. So if you own something jointly with someone, that asset's likely to be outside the trust. So the power of attorney would be necessary to manage those assets if you become incapacitated. The other things that go into that foundation, I know this is a lot in a short period of time, but hopefully this is enough of a snippet. Like you can hear the terms, be like, oh
Yes.
yeah, I remember she was talking about that.
Yeah.
The other things to remember are that part of your estate plan is jointly titled assets and beneficiary designations. So you can create the most beautiful, heartfelt, thought through will of all time. And if all of your assets are held jointly with someone else, either joint tenants with right for survivorship or tenancy by the entirety, or they pass or they pass by beneficiary designation, nothing will pass under your will.
Mm-hmm.
So the only things that pass under a will or that go into a revocable trust are assets in your sole name that do not have a beneficiary designation. So we need to make sure that their assets are titled appropriately, that you've got the designations filled out correctly to make sure that all the things work together to ultimately provide for you in the event of incapacity and to make sure your assets get where you ultimately want them to go.
And that's critical because these estate planning documents and tools can be very individual. On the flip side, if you're married and you want to provide for children or a spouse, they must work hand in hand with those other documents. Yeah. Because to your point, for example, real property that's held jointly by a married couple will likely be joint tenancy by the entireties, specifically here in North Carolina. And what that means is if, say, husband and wife or spouse A and spouse B own the property by joint tenancy by the entireties, if one person passes away, the other spouse gets full ownership of that real property in that house, which and that happens at the moment and date and time of death.
That's right.
Thereby providing a protection, if you will, for the spouse, so they don't have to worry about that house being caught up in probate. So similar to making sure you know what's in the trust or in the will and outside of the will, knowing how the repercussions of these different legal terms and property holdings work is critical, because I don't think anyone wants their significant other, especially if they're not married, and let's say the house is not in a joint tenancy by the entireties. I'm sure they don't want at their death suddenly their significant other or partner to suddenly not know where they're going to sleep in a few weeks or a couple of months. And that happens. That literally happens.
Yeah. And the thing that we see, especially like, let's say you own the property jointly with your parents and you have sort of the couple is not married. Again, the house could then immediately pass to the parents, and you would, that person, the surviving sort of significant other, would no longer have any rights to the home. So a cohabitation agreement can be helpful there. I don't know if you draft those.
Yep, we sure do.
I bet you do. But where we honestly see a lot of sort of the confusion around joint title is accounts. People will put someone on a joint account. Mom and dad will put son or daughter on the joint account because it's just easier. It's there to sort of facilitate making payments and things of that nature. And they won't realize that, let's say mom has put son on an account jointly, but mom ultimately intends for that account to pass in equal shares to both son and daughter. But by virtue of the title, all those assets pass to son. Daughter gets nothing. And so it just needs to make sure that we are identifying what it is that you want to have happen to your assets, how we make your life easier if you are alive but incapacitated. And so if having bill pay is going to be helpful to you, how do we think about that? Joint title is maybe one of those things that we could do, but maybe there are other things that we could do, including putting that account into a revocable trust and naming son as trustee so that we don't have that joint title issue. So what is it that you want to do? How do we make your life easier? And then how do we make the lives of the people that you leave behind easier? And I frequently tell people that I think estate planning is an act of love that you do for the people that you leave behind, because what you can put on your plate today from an estate planning perspective makes their lives easier with respect to the administration of the plan. It also makes their lives easier with respect to the certainty. It all goes back to anxiety and certainty, but certainty that they are doing what you want them to do. I mean, you think about those decisions about would I want to receive life prolonging procedures? Where would I want to be in my final days? Having the time, thinking through those issues and making sure that you have conversations with your next of kin and your loved ones about them will prevent them from waking up at 3 a.m. thinking, my God, did I do the right thing? I mean, I don't think anybody wants that for their loved ones. So I always think of prenups as an opportunity. I think of estate planning as an opportunity as well to really provide for the people you care about. But it does require that you take the time and sort of the emotional energy to complete it and make it thoughtful and make it personal to you.
Who would have thought a whole podcast episode between two attorneys would be all about love? That's all it's about, Jennifer. It's all about
all
love.
Good feelings.
So. Well, I want to express my sincere gratitude for having you here, joining us on the Legal Lounge. I really think it's critical information for listeners out there to hear what you and I think about as we work through these cases for the benefit of our clients. So with that noted, can you tell us or the listener, more importantly, where they can find you or the services of your company?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me by looking at Bernstein.com. And I have articles on how we can be helpful with respect to modeling out potential options for prenups, for estate plans. We've got a lot of great material on our website. You can also look at LinkedIn. I've actually got a couple of videos that I'm really proud of that explain some of the harder tax concepts that go into estate planning through dessert analogies. I have one that talks about the current exclusion by using a cupcake, and another one that talks about grantor trust through the use of a milkshake. So feel free to check out our social media as well. But yeah, if we can be of help to a family or an individual who's looking for help thinking through estate planning and the why of it all, but wants to make sure that their finances are tied in an appropriate manner, we're glad to be a resource.
I love that. Not only do I love all the desserts you just listed, I'm gonna, after this podcast, I'm gonna go ahead and subscribe and listen to this video. I'm so excited. Well, Jennifer, thank you again for joining us on the Legal Lounge, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our discussion. To learn more about me and the Modern Legal team, go to our website, modernlegalnc.com, or check out the links in our show notes to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can also call us at 704-286-6302. If you have been intrigued by the conversation and would like us to continue our discussions, please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. See you next time.